Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Caitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadama Yam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha. Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam. Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam. Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Jayapataka Swaminiti Namine. Nama Acharya Padaya Nitaikapa Pradaine. Gaura Katha Dhamadaya Nagara Gramatadine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Gopi Paranadana Dase Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaurava Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim. Yatkripatamaham bande Shri Gurudinatharinam. Yatkripatamaham bande Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. Katanchana smrite yasmin dushkaram sukaram bhavet. Vismrite viparitam syat Shri Chaitanyam namatikam. Okay, any volunteers to read today? Can you hear me? Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, all right. Let's see if we can get some volunteer to read. Otherwise, Rudradeep Nimai Prabhu, can you read?
Yeah, sure. If anybody wants to read, they can read. Otherwise, I can read.
I can read, Prabhuji.
Yeah. Can you speak a little closer to the mic?
Yes, Prabhu. Am I clear, Prabhu, now? Audible?
Yeah. Others can hear. I mean, can others confirm if we can hear her?
Can hear, Prabhu.
Okay. All right.
Am I audible, no, Prabhu? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. London, 1973. Paravidha. It was Rath Yatra day. I saw Prabhupada coming into the temple and he didn't look very strong. I was really amazed, but I could understand that his strength was something spiritual. Dhruvanatha. At the parade site, we were waiting to receive Srila Prabhupada at Marble Arch, where the procession starts. The Vyasasana was nicely decorated and everybody was expecting Prabhupada simply to sit on his Vyasasana on the cart and just ride through the streets, just as he had done in the other Rath Yatras. So it was to our great amazement and joy that when Prabhupada came, he refused to sit on the Vyasasana. He indicated that he would dance and lead the procession. Yogeshwara. They brought stairs up so Prabhupada could mount the Ratha cart and sit down on the Vyasasana. But he waved them off and just started walking with the chariots, leading and dancing. Dhira Shanta. I twisted my ankle and couldn't walk, so I rode on the cart. Therefore, I could see Prabhupada very clearly. Revati Nandana Maharaja was chanting into the microphone from the cart. But after about 15 minutes of the procession, Prabhupada told the devotees to tell Revati Nandana Maharaja and the others to come down and lead a kirtana in the street with him. Revati Nandana. When Prabhupada saw his Vyasasana on the cart, he said, "No, I am just a devotee. I will go in the procession. We had a big, great kirtana. Hamsaduta led, I led, Shyamasundara led. Different devotees traded off, leading this fantastic kirtana. And Prabhupada was right in the middle of the kirtana with his karatalas the whole time. He was dancing back and forth and jumping up and down and dancing. Rohini Nandana. The cart was going quite slowly. Prabhupada walked about 20 or 30 yards ahead of the cart, leading the procession. Meanwhile, Kirtana was coming from the Ratha cart through the microphones. Prabhupada called them all down, and he got them all around himself, and they were chanting Hare Krishna. Ever so often, he would turn around and raise both his arms very majestically in the air and say, Jai Jagannath. Sometimes we would get a little further ahead. So then he would turn around and wait for the cart to come on. Sometimes he was dancing, and sometimes he would stand, raising his hands in the air. Shardiya Dasi. Prabhupada Prabhupada would dance, and then after a few feet, he would turn around and look up at the deities with his arms raised. Then he would dance for a few moments, meditating on the deities, and then he would turn around and go on. In this way, he danced the entire way. The devotees held hands in a circle around him to protect him from the crowd. It was a wonderful, transcendental affair. Prabhupada was looking up at the deities, and all the devotees were behind him. Sudurjaya. Prabhupada surprised us. We didn't know if he was sick or not, feeling weak and dizzy or not. Sometimes he looked very ill, and sometimes he looked like an 18-year-old boy. He surprised us. He had his cane in his hand, but raised it in the air as he danced. After a while, Shyamasundara came up to me and said, listen, he is not going to make it. Prabhupada is very ill. I want you to follow in a car. Be within 30 seconds reach, so we can put Prabhupada in the car immediately. Prabhupada was going down Park Lane, and from time to time, he would turn back and raise his hands. He was going so fast that they couldn't pull the cart fast enough to keep up with him. He would have to wait for the cart to catch up. He would turn back, raise his hands, and say Hari Bol. Several times he did this. He was going so fast that he had to wait. The devotees were dancing. The weather was beautiful, and the crowd was wonderful. Dhruvanatha. The passerby were rooted to the spot, looking at Prabhupada. A man of that age, simply dancing and jumping in the air like a young boy, was the most amazing sight. And then every 5 minutes or so, Prabhupada would turn around and look toward Jagannatha. The devotees would clear the way so no one blocked his sight. And he had a perfect view of Jagannatha, Balarama, and Subhadra. But after a while, the police came and mentioned that we couldn't keep stopping like this. We had to keep a whole thing going because the traffic jams were becoming critical. Devotees were crying and chanting and dancing, and there was much commotion. Shrutakirti. When Prabhupada was dancing, the bobbies kept on coming up and looking for someone official. Finally, they came to me and said, you will have to tell your leader to sit down. He is causing too much of a disturbance. Everyone is becoming wild, and we can't control the crowd, you know. So I said, all right, but I didn't say anything to Prabhupada. So then they came again and said, you must tell him, he'll have to sit down. So I said, all right. And I tagged Prabhupada the whole time he had been in ecstasy, dancing before the cart and encouraging everyone else to dance. He would motion with his hands and encourage the devotees to keep dancing. He kept the momentum of the festival. So I said, Prabhupada, the policemen want you to sit down. They say, then, okay. Where did it go? Hare Krishna, I think the Hare Krishna Prabhu.
She can hear you.
I think this is gone now. The
I think, yeah.
sharing, yeah.
Screen sharing stopped. That's correct.
Yeah.
Masi, you can continue. Are you able to see it now? The screen, I can see the screen.
Yeah, but I have some issues. 1 second.
I think you can read again from, so they came again and said.
Yes, Prabhu, 1 minute. Prabhu. Okay. So then they came again and said, you must tell him he'll have to sit down. So I said, all right. And I tapped Prabhupada. The whole time he had been in ecstasy, dancing before the cart and encouraging everyone else to dance. He would motion with his hands and encourage the devotees to keep dancing. He kept the momentum of the festival. So I said, Prabhupada, the policemen want you to sit down. They say you are creating havoc in the parade. Prabhupada looked at me, turned and kept on. He completely ignored it and kept on dancing. And they couldn't do anything. Prabhupada wouldn't stop. The police wouldn't say anything to him. Paravidha. I was distributing Back to Godhead magazines along with the whole parade group. I was exhausted and I was having a lot of trouble keeping up with the procession. But Prabhupada was just there and he was dancing like a young boy. I was amazed at his spiritual energy. Dhruvanatha. When we came to Piccadilly Circus, Prabhupada suddenly stopped the whole procession. Piccadilly Circus, of course, was just packed with people. For about 3 minutes, Prabhupada stopped the procession and just danced and danced with the devotees all around him. Rohini Nandana. When we got to Piccadilly Circus, Prabhupada really started to dance. He was leaping off the ground. The cart was stopped. It was very similar, actually, to the description in the Caitanya Charitamrita of how Lord Caitanya would lead the Ratha Yatra procession. So the cart was stopped and then Prabhupada would wait for it to catch up. Yogeshwara. When we finally arrived at Trafalgar Square and Prabhupada saw the big tent and the other arrangements the devotees had made, he held up his hands again. He had been dancing and walking the entire route of the parade. It must have been at least an hour that he had been walking and dancing, all the way from Hyde Park to Trafalgar Square. Rohini Nandana. When Prabhupada got to Trafalgar Square, he immediately sat down on the plinth of Nelson's column on a little Vyasasana and delivered a lecture about the holy name of Krishna. This was directly after his marathon of chanting and dancing. The next day, papers carried favorable news coverage of the festival, and Prabhupada wrote of it to a disciple in Los Angeles. You will be glad to know the Rath Yatra in London was very successful. The Daily Guardian had a picture on the front page of our cart and stated that we were competition to the monument in memory of Lord Nelson in Trafalgar Square. My health is good and I am taking daily walk and speaking at the class in the morning. In another letter, Prabhupada wrote, our festival here was very well received and I was so much encouraged by the whole thing that I was able to walk and dance the entire way from Hyde Park to Trafalgar Square. Srila Prabhupada settled into a regular routine at Bhaktivedanta Manor. Here at Bhaktivedanta Manor, he wrote, the place is the nicest possible. It's calm and quiet. The village is neat and clean. Prabhupada's room on the second floor was spacious enough to seat 50 guests comfortably, and its large windows overlooked the expansive grounds. Prabhupada said that if the devotees would clean out the lake and keep up the grounds, then he would stay always at Bhaktivedanta Manor and translate here in peace. They should get some cows, he said, and use some of the extra acreage for farming. Although the devotees had not long been living in the manor and had done little to improve the buildings and grounds, Prabhupada pointed out a place where they could one day build a 30-story temple, the grandest building in all of London. He proposed that he stay for at least 2 months and install Radha Krishna deities on Janmashtami Day. He would also oversee the construction of the temple room and altar. Every morning at about 6, Prabhupada would leave the manor for an hour's walk. There was no restriction as to who could join him, and sometimes as many as 20 devotees would trail behind, trying to hear anything he might say. Looking off toward the horizon, he commented that Letmore Heath reminded him of Vrindavana. Prabhupada would walk down the lane to a place called Round Bush, stroll past a wheat field, and finally return to Letmore Heath and the manor. A local policeman had become friends with the devotees and would regularly exchange greetings with Prabhupada. Particularly, Prabhupada liked the cleanliness of the little village, and he would often point out even the smallest pieces of trash on the manor grounds. The village, he said, was much neater than American towns. Shamasundara had promised Srila Prabhupada.
Can you just pause
Yes.
for a few
Yes.
minutes? This Prabhupada's dancing at the London Rath Yatra is an incident which several devotees have recalled, as you can see here, and also in the Remembering Prabhupada series by Yadubara Prabhu. There is a lot of, you can watch that on YouTube. It's all there on YouTube. There is a very elaborate recollection by several disciples of how Prabhupada danced at this London Rath Yatra festival. Of all the Rath Yatra festivals that Prabhupada attended, this festival that he attended in 1973 at London does seem to really stand out in terms of how he walked and danced the entire way. Rath Yatra, I mean, it's interesting that we're reading this just 1 week before Rath Yatra, or let's say 10 days before Rath Yatra, which is coming up on the 20th of June in India, Jagannath Puri. When the British came to India, the most difficult thing that they had to grapple with is to comprehend what exactly was this phenomenon of Rath Yatra in Jagannath Puri. There you have forms of God which look very scary, right? With Jagannath, and I mean, for them, the whole thing was completely incomprehensible. They referred to Jagannath as the Moloch of Hindustan, and they found this like the epitome of blind faith, because when they would pull the chariots of Lord Jagannath at Puri, people would try to fall at the wheels of the Rath so that they can be crushed by the wheels, because it is explained in scripture that anyone who gets crushed by the wheels of Lord Jagannath's chariot goes back to Vaikuntha. So for them, the whole festival was completely incomprehensible. This was the sign of the epitome of the blind faith of the Hindus, bowing down to wood and stone, as they would say. Now, at that point in time, there is a famous saying about the British Empire, which was that the sun never sets on the British Empire, which means that they had colonized the whole world, practically in every corner of the world. I mean, most corners of the world, they had a colony. So when the sun would set in one colony in one part of the world, it would rise in another colony in another part of the world. So they had that pride. The sun never sets on the British Empire. So this phenomenon of Rath Yatra happening in London is equally incomprehensible, not just to the British, but even to any layman, because the empire, the British Empire, where the sun never sets, has completely vanished. You could say, yeah, it has completely vanished. But this epitome of Hindu blind faith, of pulling some three scary-looking deities. I mean, to them, they look very strange-looking, strange-looking images. So, British Empire has vanished, but Lord Jagannath has prevailed. Not only has Jagannath prevailed, but by the efforts of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jagannath rides through London. Here in this particular instance, in 1973, I don't know if the Rath Yatra rate was the same anymore, but in 1973, this is through the main streets of London and reaching all the way to Trafalgar Square. So it was the triumph of Lord Jagannath. The British Empire vanished, but Lord Jagannath not only prevailed, but he was riding through the main streets of that same British Empire. And this is the unique achievement of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. In fact, the newspapers reported that the Jagannath's cart and the whole thing was a rival to the Nelson's column at Trafalgar Square. So very interesting, very difficult to comprehend. Who would have thought that this festival, which happens in Jagannath Puri, could also happen right through the main streets of London. And today we know that it's not just the main streets of London, but so many cities across the world. Jagannath rides on his chariot to see his citizens, to see his devotees. And one other thing that although I've read the Leelamrita before, but I mean, practically in scrutinizing detail, but somehow this just completely missed me that Prabhupada, if you notice here, Prabhupada pointed out a place where they could one day build a 30-story temple. I've never heard anybody speak about it, discuss about it, or what happened with this plan or this desire that Prabhupada had to build a 30-story temple, the grandest building in all of London at Bhaktivedanta Manor. Over to Sailesh Govinda Prabhu. Do you have any information about that?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanava Pranam Sarvesh Prabhupada. Yes, a very, very emotional part of the Leelamrita for me because it's during this period that me and my parents, I was quite young at the time, I was only about 5, 6, 7 maybe, met Prabhupada 3 times during this period. And at the manor, and particularly with the installation of the Radha Gokulam and the deities at the manor. So it's a very, very emotional part, and the Rath Yatra still to date goes through more or less the same route as was routed out in the original Rath Yatra time. It goes from Hyde Park Corner now, rather than Marble Arch, which is further down Park Lane, through Piccadilly, through to Trafalgar Square. Same format, same format, and it's still as ecstatic as was then. And I think Srila Prabhupada has set the mood for the London Rath Yatra, which has never changed thereafter. So it is, with respect to this 30-story building, it's never been talked about, Prabhuji, but as you may well be aware, and some of the devotees may be aware, Manor has been through quite a lot of turmoil in terms of planning issues and neighbor issues, and the village, the beautiful village that Prabhupada talks about, the neighboring residents there were very anti Hare Krishna movement, and because there was thousands and thousands of people congregating there, and they just, for them this was a tranquil, quaint English village, which had been suddenly transformed by all these hundreds, if not thousands, of people coming through that little village road to enter. Because in the olden days, the access to the manor was through the village, and that village was quite a, it is quite a tranquil, picturesque sort of village, English village. So they tried to shut it down, as you probably are all aware, to try and effectively they got a ban of all public attendance for the manor, and then there was a big campaign in the 80s to try and keep the manor open. Then a separate tract of land was bought all the way up the manor property from farmers, etc., to create a new road, which would then give access to the manor from a main trunk road, the A41, down to the manor, thereby bypassing the village altogether. And the village access was then shut. Subsequent to that, the history of the manor has been quite checkered in terms of trying to get planning permission. Every application has taken years to try and get through, because it's on Greenbelt, and it's a lot of resistance from the same villages that tried to shut it down in terms of building. But regardless of that, we've, I think the senior devotees who are so devoted at the manor have managed to achieve miraculous achievements. There's a substantial Goshala that's been built. Close to 40-50 cows are maintained at the manor permanently, as per Srila Prabhupada's request. There is a large farming project that also happened on site. It's about a 30-acre site now. More land has been bought since the original gift of George Harrison. It was originally, it was quite substantial, but it's much smaller than what it is today in terms of land and property. We've bought quite a lot of the neighboring cottages in the village as well, and quite a few devotees now are residents within the village, and the villagers have since become much more amenable and accepting of the manor. Still resistance, every planning permission there is resistance. But just prior to COVID and prior to Shriti-Dhamma Prabhu's departure, who was instrumental in the fight with the manor and the leadership of the manor, he was quite an instrumental devotee. Shriti-Dhamma Prabhu passed away just at the time of COVID starting. And ironically, the first function that happened on this substantial development of the Haveli, which is a major update to the manor. The Haveli basically provides large halls and gathering area, prasadam area, etc. The deities still remain in the old original temple room in the manor itself, but the whole Haveli complex has been built in front of the manor towards the car park. Substantial amount of property has been built and buildings have been built to provide basically congregation areas, meeting areas, wedding areas, that all of that was done in marquees prior to the Haveli being built. So marquees again were very restricted as to when they could put them up. They could only put them up during the Janmashtami festival for the week 10 days, and one marquee was able to be built and put up for weddings in and around a 2-month period of Janmashtami. Prior to that, all weddings have to be done in what was a relatively small temple room, because it's the old lounge on not the lounge, one of the large reception rooms was converted to the temple room, and there is the whole bay window area was converted into the altar area with lighting, etc. So substantial changes happened, but no movement anywhere near to the 30-story building that Prabhupada has predicted so far. I'm sure it'll happen. Prabhupada has said it will happen, so I'm sure it'll happen at some point, but I suspect it's going to be next generation or two that'll be leading that charge, because it's probably not going to happen within our lifetime, given the planning restrictions and permission process that we've been through at the manor. So thank you. Sorry, I've kind of rambled on a little bit beyond the question you asked.
No, I think this is a very good explanation. You gave a very detailed, elaborate, and very absorbing story of development of Bhaktivedanta manner. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone has any thoughts, questions, comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, can you hear me? Haribol, Prabhu, I think you're on mute. Haribol.
We can't hear you very well.
Hare Krishna, can you hear me now? Haribol. Hare Krishna, am I audible, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji, yeah, you're audible. Yes.
Yeah.
Audible.
Prabhuji, just remembered something offhand, which one of the Maharajas mentioned in his lecture. Probably it was Bhakti Purushottam Maharaj, but I'm not very sure. And he was talking about this sun never setting on the British Empire. So he said that these Britishers were so proud and they made this statement. But now there are many days when the sun doesn't even rise over the British Empire, he said, which is in the British Isles.
But anyway, the British Empire has vanished practically, right? I mean,
Yeah, so that's how he said it sarcastically, that, that the sun doesn't even rise over the British Empire, that small British Empire, the British Isles.
Okay. I got it. Thank you for that humorous interlude. Anyone else? What's
I think, Prabhuji, they have coined that word also, that juggernaut is through that Jagannath Rath Yatra only. Prabhuji.
Yeah. There are many British words, many English words which have its origin from India. For example, juggernaut, yes. Juggernaut refers to something which moves great force and crushes everything along its way. Then, for example, soup. Soup is from the Bhagavatam. If you look at it, supam. Supam refers to a broth of vegetables, vegetable broth. So there are many words in English which have its origin from India or from scriptures, Indian script. I mean, whatever. This part of Vedic scriptures and things like that.
But especially they say that this, for this juggernaut is from that Jagannath Rath Yatra only. It has been derived. They say.
Correct. Yeah, it's been derived from. Thank you for bringing that out. Yes, juggernaut. Juggernaut.
Prabhu Harishna.
Yeah.
Prabhu, there are two temples in London, Prabhu.
Yes.
One is this Bhaktivedanta Manor. The other temple also was there while Prabhupada was there. It came subsequently, Prabhu.
Yeah, we
that was the first temple that was created, Berry Place. That's where we read that earlier in the Lilamitra, actually. Berry Place was in 69 or 71. I can't remember now the date, but it was much earlier. this is when Shyam Sundar Prabhu and the other the two couples that came and started sorry, Prabhu, you should talk. I'm so
No, you can
sorry.
go ahead. You can go ahead. You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
No, you say, Prabhu.
No, you please go ahead. I'll just add something to that. You please go ahead. Yeah, I mean.
So yeah, the couple that originally came, that was very place. And if you recall earlier in the Lilamitra, it talks about Shyam Sundar Prabhu smoking whilst carving the Jagannath deity. So in Berry Place, Lord Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra were installed. And then later on, much later on, I think about 6 years later, they moved to Soho, 7 years later, moved to Soho Place. Around mid-70s, 73, 74, I can't remember the date, I'll double check. They moved from Berry Place to Soho Square, which is the current location of the temple. That was it. You
Yeah, one
that.
very interesting thing about that, about Radha Landanishwara is the fact that the person who wanted to donate those deities, Prabhupada actually tricked him. I mean, he was, Prabhupada actually goes to his house. We read that, right? How Prabhupada goes to his house, and then he says a finger of Radharani is chipped off, and Prabhupada says, no, it doesn't matter, we'll fix it. And then Prabhupada, with his disciples, Shyam Sundar, and was it Tamal Krishna Maharaj? I mean, I don't recollect who else was there. They take Radha Landanishwara into the car, and they start driving off, and the man is quite surprised what happened, because he had called them to donate, but then he didn't think that he had wanted to donate, but he didn't think the Prabhupada would act so fast. And then once they drive off a little distance, and Prabhupada offers obeisances to ask the car to stop, and he offers obeisances to Radha Landanishwara, and I mean, I think he also sings this Govindam prayers to them. It's a very interesting pastime, how Radha Landanishwara came. And I just wanted to share something personal on that. I don't know if I mentioned it during that when we were reading it, that a calendar of Radha Landanishwara were in my home even before I took to Krishna consciousness. I didn't know that these were ISKCON deities. So, but they were in my house for almost 3 years or 4 years. I mean, even more, you know. No, but they came, I think, 2 years or so before I took Krishna consciousness. Very beautiful deities. So only after I think that was the first contact that I had with ISKCON, either the Krishna book or Radha Landanishwara calendar. I don't know which came first though. That eventually when I took to Krishna consciousness, then I realized, oh, this is the picture of Radha Landanishwara.
Thank you, bro.
They're also the first, I believe they're also the first marble deities of Radha Krishna installed by Prabhupada anywhere in its mom.
Yeah, I think so, right?
Marble,
Any-
yeah. I think the ones in Los Angeles, etc., were brass. Or
But was Los Angeles installation happened before? I mean, before London.
Yeah,
Radha
but they were. I think Panchadhatu or brass. Probably. I think they weren't marble. These are the first marble deities.
Oh.
That's why they are actually, Landanishwar is not in the typical ISKCON deity style. They're actually dressed underneath, painted and dressed underneath, which is why their outfits always have to be adapted differently, because they don't have the open arm and they're not the typical ISKCON deity style. They're the traditional painted deities underneath.
Oh. They had come all the way to Bangalore to save me.
So if I'm not mistaken, the Rukmini Dwarkadish deities are also marble, isn't it?
No, that's what Salish Govinda Prabhu is saying, that from whatever he knows, they were first brass deities, and the marble deities came later.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, they're still Rukmini Dwarkadish, not Radha Krishna.
Yeah.
You could say in one sense they're the same, but yeah. Anyone else has anything to say or ask? We'll go ahead. Mati, you can please continue.
Yes, Prabhu. Shyam Sundara had promised Srila Prabhupada many interested visitors, and Srila Prabhupada reciprocated, promising that as long as the interested people kept coming, he would remain in England. Each night, one or two guests, including scholars, priests, and occasional celebrities, would come and visit with Prabhupada for a couple of hours. Prabhupada seemed especially eager to present the philosophy of Krishna consciousness to intelligent persons. As the world's foremost Vaishnava Parampara, philosopher of the Gita and the Bhagavatam, he had thoroughly realized the conclusion of the Vedic literature. He was experienced in countering all challenges and atheistic philosophies and knew what to expect from Christians, Mayavadi, atheist, anyone. If a guest mentioned the name of a philosopher or school of thought unfamiliar to Prabhupada, then Prabhupada would simply ask, what is his philosophy? Inevitably, he would recognize the new philosophy for what it was, an old, familiar, mundane philosophy, with a new twist perhaps, easily defeated or brought to its perfection with Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada was always eager to glorify Krishna and repeat Krishna's message with complete enthusiastic freshness. He would present again the same points he had presented many times before. He said he was like a cow that gives milk in any field. Put him in India or America or England, he would always give the same nectarian milk of Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada's entire day, his early morning dictation of Caitanya Charitamrita, morning walk, Bhagavad Gita lecture, talks with guests revolved around philosophy. In Scotland, when a man had challenged that God needn't be presented through philosophy, Prabhupada had replied, what do you expect me to talk? Some fairy tales? Philosophy was necessary, especially for the so-called intelligent persons whose minds raised so many intellectual doubts. And besides, to always be telling others about Krishna, Prabhupada said, was a symptom of love. Moved by compassion for others' suffering, Prabhupada always spoke the message of Krishna and never tired of repeating it. He was genuinely angered by the atheistic speculators who misled the people because materialistic and impersonalistic philosophies ruin a person's chances of finding the solution to life's suffering. Whenever Prabhupada heard anyone arguing the Mayavada doctrine, he would become like fire. He could not tolerate it. He had to correct it. When, after one of Prabhupada's lectures at the manor, a boy had said he had heard someone call the chanting of Hare Krishna a little bit of bluff, Prabhupada had replied, who says bluff? Who is that fool? Who is that rascal? He had been ready to fight the atheist to glorify Krishna. These were Prabhupada's natural drives. Therefore, he could go on and on without stopping. He wanted to give people Krishna consciousness. He had no other life. Even while relaxing in the privacy of his room, he always spoke of Krishna consciousness. The devotees had invited many prominent British citizens to meet Srila Prabhupada, and the responses were good. Economist Ernst Schumacher promised to visit, as did philosopher Sir Alfred J. Ayer. When Shyam Sundara informed Prabhupada that Mr. Ayer was well known, Prabhupada replied, what is his philosophy? Well, Shyam Sundara replied, he doesn't believe in existence of God. I will give him evidence. Prabhupada replied, I will ask him what he means by the existence of God. I will ask him to make a list of the different deficiencies of God's existence. Prabhupada liked to meet with philosophical men and corner them and defeat them. Historian Arnold Diane was old and invalid. Therefore, Prabhupada agreed to visit him at his residence. Interested in discussing life after death, Dr. Diane asked Prabhupada about karma. Most people, he said, were afraid of death. Prabhupada agreed and added that, according to a certain astrologer, one of India's recent leaders had taken birth as a dog. So they're afraid they will go down, he said. When Doyen asked if karma could be changed, Prabhupada replied, yes, but only by bhakti, devotion to God. Arnold Doyen, not many people in the West are thinking of this, Prabhupada. They are less intelligent. It's not good. If they take to Krishna consciousness, they can continue to work and live in the city, but they can change their consciousness. Then automatically everything will come. Srila Prabhupada asked Mr. Toynbee about the book he was writing, and the professor replied that it concerned ancient Greece's influence on the Greece of today. The Greeks came from India, Prabhupada said. Vedic culture was once all over the world. Gradually, a new type of culture, just like this recent partition of India and Pakistan, took place. Prabhupada explained how in the future governments would fall to rascals and thieves, whose only business would be to exploit the citizens. Food would be scarce, and the governments would levy so many taxes that people would be would be harassed to and go to the forest for shelter. Only the God-conscious people would be free. The future would be an ocean of faults with but one saving factor. Simply by chanting Krishna's names, one could be freed. Even now, Prabhupada said, the hippies were going to the forest and the men were separated from their wives and money and were going to the hills and forests in disappointment. You can predict the future in this way, Prabhupada said. Arnold Toynbee. In India, did the politicians keep the Vedas? Prabhupada, no, they threw them away. Present Indian politicians are not very satisfied with the Vedas. They threw them in the water. I have started among the Indians and Americans, and for the next 10,000 years, Krishna consciousness will increase. Then there will be gloomy picture of Kali Yuga. 10,000 years is not a short time. It's our duty on behalf of Krishna. I'll not time me. Do you travel much? Prabhupada, all over the world. A bearded young priest, active in social service, visited Prabhupada and upon Prabhupada's prodding, debated with him about meat eating and the Bible. During the discussion, Hamsaduta and Pradyumna were citing passages from the Bible against meat eating. Later, after the priest had left, Prabhupada called Hamsaduta back into his room and said, it was not very good for us to speak on the basis of the Bible. Better we stick to the Gita. Why bother to approach them for compromise or cooperation? They will never be convinced. What is the point of meeting with the Pope? Those inclined to meat eating, Prabhupada said, could always find some quote in the Bible, such as covenant with Noah after the flood. We do not even know what ghastly things are occurring in the slaughterhouse. He said, no one sees these things. The next morning, on his walk, Prabhupada continued discussing his talk with the priest. In the name of religion, Prabhupada said, they are killing. The Bhagavatam says, this cheating religion is kicked out and simply worship of God is instated. Devotee. The priest last night said that Jesus ate meat. Prabhupada. Then Jesus contradicted himself. He also said, thou shalt not kill. One shouldn't imitate the Ishwaras. A hippie type mendicant in India takes ganja and claims to be a devotee of Shiva. No, we should not imitate the powerful controllers. That priest said also that the Bible does not say, thou shalt not kill, but thou shalt not murder. So I told him that if the word is actually thou shalt not murder in the Oriental Hebrew, then Jesus must have been preaching to the 4th class, 10th class men, murderers. And the proof is that they murdered him. So such people, what can they understand about God? When I told him, the priest was silent. He could not answer. Another priest came to see Prabhupada. And again the question came up. Prabhupada asked him, then you are in favor of killing? Priest replied, well, it's a fallen world. It is a fallen world, Prabhupada said. But we do not have to be among the fallen. The priest cited the covenant with Noah. Prabhupada replied, maybe Noah allowed it at that time, the time of devastation. But that doesn't mean you always have to do it. To live in such a time, one can eat anything to stay alive. But now, so many things are in abundance to keep healthy without maintaining a slaughterhouse. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, protect the cows. It's the duty of the Vaishyas. Although Prabhupada willingly discussed with the Christians, he admitted privately that to argue with them was a waste of time. They will never agree, he said, even if they are defeated. The best way to preach to people in general was through the chanting of Hare Krishna, as at the Rath Yatra festival. Chant, dance, take prasadam, and invite everyone to join. Anyway, he said, they don't even follow their teachings. One boy came to me and said he wanted to talk. He said, I am a Christian. But I told him, you are not a Christian. Thou shalt not kill. The man from Calcutta came to see Prabhupada. But as soon as the man began to say something about Krishna, Prabhupada interrupted. Krishna is something very difficult to understand. We are just trying to understand that there is a next life. But the Christians say there is no future life, the man said. At the end of this one, you either go to heaven or hell. But if they talk about going to heaven, said Prabhupada, then that is the next life. But knowledge of Krishna is only for the most perfect out of thousands among men. Mr. Kumar, who sometimes lived in the London temple, visited Prabhupada with many questions. He wanted to work for ISKCON, he said, but required money to send his mother in India. No, Prabhupada told him, your men work 24 hours a day without a farthing. Mr. Kumar suggested ways to improve ISKCON. The devotees needed to study more, he said, especially Sanskrit, and become scholars. Prabhupada disagreed. All we need is dedication, he said. I am not a great Sanskrit scholar, but I am pulling on. And even the scholars say it is good. My Guru Maharaja, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaja, was illiterate. Still, his disciple, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, was the greatest scholar of the day. But when Gaur Kishore spoke, it was exactly from the Shastra. Our principle is not to take time to learn something and become expert and then preach. But whatever you know, preach. Class in the morning, class in the evening. And if they read my books, that is sufficient. One day, the devotees brought Prabhupada a newspaper clipping in which an Oxford professor, Dr. D. Zainer, had said at the religion conference that Lord Krishna and his Bhagavad Gita teachings were immoral. Dr. Zainer had said that a famous murderer was perhaps influenced by the Bhagavad Gita because Krishna says that the soul is immortal, so one can therefore kill. Srila Prabhupada was disgusted at the professor's ignorance. On his morning walk, he dictated to his secretary arguments to use in writing to Dr. Zainer. George Harrison approached Prabhupada in a submissive mood, similar to that of Prabhupada's disciples. Prabhupada and George took prasadam together, a special lunch of samosas, halwa, vegetable, sour cream, and puris. While they were enjoying the prasadam, Prabhupada mentioned that certain Vrindavana Pandas, professional guides at a holy place, eat too much. Once, one ate so much that he was practically dying, but he assured his son, at least I am dying from eating and not from starving. To die of starvation is unglorious. Prabhupada smiled as he talked with George, gratefully acknowledging his donation to the manor. Have you seen my room? Prabhupada asked. It's actually your house, but my room. No, George protested, preferring the mood of a humble disciple. It is Krishna's house and your room. When George confided to Prabhupada that by taking to Krishna consciousness, he was losing friends, Prabhupada told him not to worry. He read to George from the Gita, where Krishna explains that he can be known only by devotional service. In the future, said George, ISKCON will be so large, it will require executive management. Prabhupada, I have divided the world into 12 zones with the 12 representatives. As long as they keep to the spiritual principles, Krishna will help them. Before leaving, George assured Prabhupada that he would help him increase his temples. Later, Prabhupada commented, George is getting inward hope from Krishna. One day, an old acquaintance dropped by, Allen Ginsberg, wearing denims, suspenders, and a faded shirt and carrying a little Indian-made harmonium. You're still chanting Hare Krishna? Prabhupada asked. Yes, Allen replied. I still chant Hare Krishna, but I also chant other things. Allen asked if Prabhupada would like to hear his chanting and playing. Prabhupada nodded. Allen began playing his harmonium and chanting Om. With each recitation of the word Om, his voice went deeper. Om. When the chant was over, Prabhupada began to laugh. You can chant whatever you want to chant, he said, but just keep chanting Hare Krishna. As long as you are chanting Hare Krishna, then everything else is all right. Prabhupada then allowed many devotees to join them for a big blissful kirtan. Through George Harrison, another famous pop singer and musician, Donovan was drawn to come and see the renowned leader of the Hare Krishna movement. Donovan, accompanied by a musician friend and their two girlfriends in miniskirts, sat in awkward silence before Prabhupada. Prabhupada spoke. There is a verse in the Vedas that says music is the highest form of education. And he began to explain how a musician could serve Krishna. You should do like your friend George, Prabhupada said. We will give you the themes and you can write the songs. Prabhupada said that anything, even money, could be used in the service of Krishna. But money is material, Donovan's girlfriend interrupted. What do you know? What is material and spiritual? Prabhupada said. He turned to Donovan. Do you understand? Donovan humbly replied that he was thick-headed but trying. Donovan's girlfriend then leaned over and whispered something into his ear. Whereupon Donovan stood up and said, well, we have to go now. Prabhupada insisted that at least they first take some prasadam. As soon as the guests left, Prabhupada and his disciples began to laugh. Prabhupada said, she was thinking, and he encouraged his disciple to finish the sentence. Yes, said Yogeshwara. She was thinking that if Krishna gets him, then she will lose him. Prabhupada, so much like preaching to important guests that he wanted to continue doing so wherever he traveled. Wherever I shall go now, Prabhupada wrote in a letter to a disciple. This policy of important men being invited to talk with me about our Krishna consciousness movement should be implemented. A month passed at Manor, and still several weeks remained before Janmashtami and the deity installation. So when Bhagavan requested Prabhupada to come for a visit to Paris and install Radha Krishna deities, Prabhupada agreed. Shall I continue, Prabhu? Okay, Paris, August 9, 1973. The devotees had arranged the official City Hall reception for Prabhupada. In the presence of the mayor of Paris and his government entourage, Srila Prabhupada said that if the government leaders do not teach the citizens genuine God consciousness, then they are not responsible leaders. Reporting this talk in the next day's paper, a news writer stated that the Swami even criticized Napoleon Bonaparte. Bhagavan. We had just moved into our new temple at 4 Rue les-Sceaux, Paris, and we had received 48-inch Radha and Krishna deities. Prabhupada had Pradyumna chanting the mantras and pouring the substances on the deities, while Prabhupada himself looked from his Vyasasana, giving directions. I was assisting, and at one point I turned around and saw Srila Prabhupada standing right next to me, taking the substances in his own hands and smearing them over the lotus-like face of Srimati Radharani. After the deities were installed on the altar, Srila Prabhupada came up and offered the arati, and I assisted him by handing him the articles. After the installation, we went up to Srila Prabhupada's room and very anxiously requested him to please give a name for the deities. He sat back in his chair and said that the deities will be known as Radha Paris Ishwara. He then went on to say that in India, people look to England for education and to Paris for sense gratification. He began to laugh and said that Krishna has come to Paris in order to get some gopis, some French girls, because the faces of women in Paris are considered the most beautiful. Radharani is so beautiful, Prabhupada said, just like a Paris girl. And Krishna has come here to find out this most beautiful of all the gopis. So he is Paris Ishwara. August 15. Prabhupada returned to London and the latest mail from India. A legal complication had arisen regarding the deed for ISKCON's land in Hyderabad. Prabhupada wrote his disciple Mahamsa, cautioning him to avoid becoming entangled in another Bombay affair. When Prabhupada also received word that the temple construction was progressing in Vrindavana, he replied, I am pleased to hear how you are completely absorbed in the project of our Vrindavan temple and taxing your brain how it can be carried out. I am also always praying to Krishna that he may give you intelligence to carry out rightly. In a letter to a disciple in Hawaii, Prabhupada apologized for not replying to a letter. I was very busy in Bombay for the Juhu land of Mr. N. Now he is dead and gone, but he had created so many obstacles. Still, there is discrepancy, but I hope this will be squared up without delay. Writing to Tamala Krishna Goswami in Bombay, Prabhupada was attentive as ever to the ongoing troubles there. Although the devotees remained in possession of the land and had rebuilt their temporary temple, no purchase settlement was in sight. If Mrs. N is not going to sell us the land, then what next step we have to adopt? We fixed a criminal case against her for attempting to dispossess us from the land. And what happened to that case? The idea is that if she is not going to sell the land to us and at the same time does not return our money with damages and interest and occasionally tries to dispossess us from the land, then what steps we have to take? She has given us so much trouble and botheration. And Prabhupada wrote to his disciples in Mayapur, yes, Mayapur construction must be completely finished before I return. The next time I come here, there must be no more workers or carpenters with their tuk-tuk sound. I would have continued to stay in Mayapur, but the hammering sounds drove me away. When you are completely finished, I will go there. Otherwise, not. Prabhupada also answered dozens of letters from America, where the devotees were becoming more and more keen to distribute his books. Their letters contained very crucial questions that only Prabhupada could solve. How important was book distribution? Would the devotees abandon their robes and wear regular Western clothes to better distribute books in public? Was chanting on the streets more important than the book distribution? What about taking buses and vans around the country? Would they travel with deities in the vans? The devotees generally mention their own viewpoint in their letters to Prabhupada, and yet they respectfully awaited his definitive reply. The Krishna consciousness movement was now big, with the potential for growing much bigger. And within ISKCON, Prabhupada was so powerful that a single letter from him would establish a policy for years to come. Prabhupada appeared to be sitting quietly in his room at the manor, following his daily routine of bathing, eating, and meeting evening guests. At the same time, he was directing thousands of young men and women all over the world and sending them into action in the war against Maya. There is no objection to going in Western clothes in order to distribute my books. It's not necessary that we always wear robes, but we should always keep shikha and tilaka. However, a wig or a hat may be worn as you described. We have to take whatever is the favorable position for executing Krishna consciousness. Do not forget our principles, but sometimes we may adopt such means in order to distribute books. Somehow or other, distribute books, and if you can impress people a little to chant, then it doesn't matter about your dress. The devotees continued to request clarification as to how far the ends justified the means in fulfilling Prabhupada's order to distribute books profusely. Srila Prabhupada, being free of any material motivation, could clearly see the Krishna conscious thing to do. Regarding the question you have raised about traveling Sankirtana parties and selling of books, yes, we want money. So that is the real preaching, selling books. Who can speak better than the books? At least whoever buys, he will look over. The real preaching is selling books. You should know the tactic how to sell without irritating. What your lecture will do for 3 minutes, but if he reads one page, his life may be turned. We don't want to irritate anyone. However, if he goes away by your aggressive tactics, then you are nonsense and it's your failure. Neither you could sell a book, neither he would remain. But if he buys a book, that is the real successful preaching. That is the certificate of my Guru Maharaja. If someone
Hare
brahmachari,
Krishna, sorry. Mataji, could you please put your yourself on mute? You're creating a lot of disturbance in the background, please, Mata. Sorry, Mataji, for disturbing you. Sorry, it was disturbing you quite a lot. So apologies.
we don't want to irritate anyone. However, if he goes away by your aggressive tactics, then you are nonsense and it's your failure. Neither you could sell a book, neither he would remain. But if he buys a book, that is the real successful preaching. That is the certificate of my Guru Maharaja. If someone, brahmachari, would sell a 1 paise magazine, if one of our brahmacharis would go and sell a few copies, he would be very, very glad and say, oh, you are so nice. So distribution of literature is our real preaching. Now, if you cannot handle the matter nicely, that is your fault. But the success of your preaching will be substantiated by how many books are sold. Anything you want to sell, you have to canvass a little. So he gives some money for the service of Krishna. That is his good luck, and he gets the chance to read some transcendental knowledge. But if you only irritate and he goes away, that is your less intelligence. Prabhupada's instructions were so important to the disciples that a letter from him was as effective as a personal visit. By such letters, he maintained the lives and affairs of his disciples all over the world. Each day, in the late morning, he would have his secretary read aloud each incoming letter, and usually he would dictate the answer without delay. He had often said that the Vani or order of the Guru was more important than the Vapu or personal presence. Thus, by his letters, he established and illuminated the path of Krishna consciousness for his sincere followers. In America, now Prabhupada's preaching was primarily through the distribution of his books, whereas in India, it was through establishing temples. Yet, both methods were one and the same to him. And although his vision encompassed the whole world, he felt and described himself as only the humble servant of his spiritual master. Whether sitting peacefully on the lawn of the manor and teasing one of the little children, or directing one of his lieutenants to drop thousands and millions of books into the laps of the conditioned souls. Whether meditating with great energy on the next phrase in the Srimad Bhagavatam purports, or worrying about what Mrs. N was conspiring in Bombay, he always tried to serve his Guru Maharaja. Srila Prabhupada received an emergency phone call from Bombay. Giriraja wanted him to come and personally settle with Mrs. N the purchase of the Juhu land. Giriraja had consulted a new lawyer, Mr. Bakil, who felt that Prabhupada must be present for there to be a settlement. Another ISKCON lawyer, Mr. Chandawal, also advised that Srila Prabhupada come immediately to Bombay. Giriraja therefore had telephoned Prabhupada, begging him to please come and settle the matter with Mrs. N once for all. Prabhupada agreed. He would remain in London one more week until Janmashtami. Then he would return to Bombay. August 21. M. Rasgotra, the Indian ambassador to England, attended the Janmashtami Day celebration and introduced Srila Prabhupada, expressing his appreciation of Prabhupada's great work. Prabhupada spoke, describing the advent of Krishna as the key to peace for the troubled material world. Especially in India, he said, we have got so much asset for understanding God. Everything is there, ready-made, but we won't accept. So what is the remedy for such disease? We are searching after peace, but we don't accept anything which is actually giving us peace. This is our disease. So the Krishna consciousness movement is trying to awaken the dormant Krishna consciousness in everyone's heart. Otherwise, how could these Europeans and Americans and other countrymen who had never ever even heard of Krishna 4 or 5 years ago be taking to Krishna consciousness so seriously? Therefore, Krishna consciousness is there in everyone's heart. Prabhupada recited prayers from Brahma Samhita describing the sublime eternal existence of Krishna on his eternal planet Krishna Loka. But Krishna is also everywhere. He explained, and if you are a devotee, then you can catch him. If you want to catch him, he comes forward 10 times more than your desire. Therefore, we simply have to receive him. This deity worship in the temple means worshipping Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has very kindly accepted to assume a form which you can handle. Therefore, do not think that we have installed a marble statue. The rascals will say, they are heathens. No, we are worshipping Krishna personally. Krishna was kindly assumed this form because we cannot see the gigantic Krishna or how Krishna is everywhere. Remain 24 hours a day in Krishna's service. This is the purpose of installing the deity. Hare Krishna Prabhu, should I continue?
No, I just want to say a few things.
Yes.
One is that Prabhupada's sense of okay, I wanted to say something in the previous thing, but then I forgot, and then I just wanted to say this now. That Prabhupada was revolutionary clean. So for him, he explained to us that cleanliness is not next to godliness. Cleanliness is godliness. So in the manor grounds, we saw how Satsarup Maharaj brings it out, that he would often point out even the smallest piece of trash on the manor grounds. So he was very particular about it. And we also see Prabhupada's strategy of dealing with people who cannot deal with philosophy. So he says that we can invite them to our festivals and in that way attract them to Krishna consciousness. So chant, dance, take prasadam, and invite everyone to join. So that was Prabhupada's strategy specifically when people were not willing to listen. And when Prabhupada installed the deities in Paris, he gave a very interesting name to them. So by saying that how in India, people generally go to England for education and Paris for sense gratification. So he said that Krishna has come to seek Radharani in London. So he's called Radha Parisishwara. And here we see, of course, one small glimpse we get into. Prabhupada didn't like banging of doors. Prabhupada didn't like the tuck sound. But however, we cannot, put Prabhupada into a box. Ultimately, he's a transcendental person. So Bombay, even though there was so much of, we'll see later on in the Lilamrita, even though there is his room is not finished, he moves into the Bombay room. This will come much later. So we can't, the human mind cannot grasp either Krishna or a pure devotee. So yes, Prabhupada in general did not like banging of doors, all these tuck sounds and things that he liked quietness, stillness while he especially transcribed his books, he wrote the books. However, we have to see according to time, place, circumstances also. He did whatever is needed to serve Krishna. So here he says that I would continue to stay in Mayapur, but the hammering sounds drove me away. When you are completely finished, I will go there, otherwise not. So basically, Prabhupada is encouraging devotees to finish the construct and fast. So on the plea of the tuck sounds disturbing him, because we do know that Prabhupada had different strategies. Although he didn't like the sounds, but nevertheless, he would also tolerate sounds if that was going to get something accomplished. So here, not tolerating the sound was Prabhupada's strategy to get something accomplished in Mayapur. And then we see how in his response to his letters that he got, Prabhupada was very specific about what we should do. For example, he says, there is no objection to going in Western clothes in order to distribute my books. it is not necessary that we always wear the robe, but we should always keep shikha and tilak. He said a wig or a hat is also okay. So this is an instruction which Prabhupada gave, very specific. So he was not willing to concede not wearing a tilak and shikha. So this is an instruction which the founder Acharya has given. So we should be careful that we stick within the boundaries that Prabhupada said. One could say, oh, maybe it is for that time, now we should do different. Like that, we can come up with different things. But the specific question that was asked to Prabhupada was, what if people are not able to relate? So because there's no end to it, that, okay, people are not able to relate to tilak next, then they're not able to relate to even Sanskrit mantra, they're not able to do. So Prabhupada makes it very clear. Do not forget our principles, but sometimes we run out such means in order to distribute the books. So somehow or other distribute books, and if you can impress people a little to chant, then it does not matter about your dress. So Prabhupada is very specific about dress here. Appearance to the extent that you can wear a wig, but shikha cannot be removed, tilak cannot be removed. So this is Prabhupada's strategy. Now, if you ask me that people are doing that without that also, well, you can do a lot of things without what Prabhupada has said and contradictory to Prabhupada had said, and you can achieve some results. But we are not some rational theologians. Rational theology means that you do something with your rational mind, and then there is some result, and you say this is bona fide. We are not rational theologians. We are revelational theologians. Our process sticks to the principle of revelation. This is what Prabhupada has revealed, how we should distribute books. So we should stick with the revelational theology. We should not jump into rational theology and make all kinds of, there could be some results, but who cares? We are interested in the results produced by revelational theology. That is what sticks, and that is what is long lasting, because as they say, end justifies the means, but where does it end? So we can come up with all kinds of concoction. Finally, we'll not even know where is Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada speaks about how devotees could use tact in distributing books, but they cannot be so aggressive that they chase away people. So they should always be careful not to irritate people. Okay. Any thoughts, reflections before we go on to Bombay? And once we get on to Bombay, we'll go all the way till it finishes this chapter, because there wouldn't be time to take any reflections or questions. And so now we'll just do it now before we get on to Bombay. Bombay, we'll still have some time for reflections and questions in the next class, probably at the beginning. But now we will take any questions, reflections, thoughts, comments so far. Looks like there are none today. So we'll end with the Bombay story. I mean, Prabhupada actually wins. I mean, everything settles in Bombay. The chapter ends with on that triumphant note. So, Indulekha Mataji, please go ahead.
Sorry, Prabhu, I unmuted. I didn't unmute it. That is why.
Pardon?
No,
Yeah,
no,
anyways.
I had not unmuted it. Prabhu. Sorry.
No worries. Anyway,
Yeah.
just now
Yeah.
the screen share
Yes.
came on.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Bombay, September 15, 1973. A day after his arrival, Srila Prabhupada met with Mrs. N solicitors and heard their offers. The situation had begun to look hopeful, and yet the conclusion eluded them. Mrs. N had become changed by the public reaction to her attempt to demolish the temple. If Prabhupada would pay the full balance of 12 lakh rupees for the land in one payment, she told her lawyer she would agree. Prabhupada was agreeable, but did not want to arrange to collect his money until he was certain that Mrs. N was actually serious. Mr. Asnani, a Bombay lawyer and ISKCON life member, regularly met with Mrs. N, persuading her to cooperate with Prabhupada. Her lawyers concurred. After Prabhupada had been in Bombay for several weeks, no meeting with Mrs. N had taken place. Once, Mr. Asnani went to bring Mrs. N to meet with Prabhupada, but she was not feeling well. Day after day, Mr. Asnani would tell Prabhupada, Mrs. N will come tomorrow. Prabhupada became disappointed at the procrastination. And seeing this, his secretaries told Mr. Asnani that although they knew he meant well, they were inclined to have their other lawyers handle the case. Mr. Asnani asked for another 48 hours to close the deal and execute the conveyance. Mrs. N was at her other home, where she had just recovered from her illness. When Mr. Asnani visited Mataji, he begged, "My Guru Maharaja is leaving tomorrow. If you don't come tonight, the problem with the land will go on another year." Mrs. N agreed, and around 9 p.m., she and Mr. Asnani arrived at the home of Mr. Bogilal Patel, where Srila Prabhupada was holding a program of Kirtana and Bhagavata discourses. Prabhupada was on the roof preparing to lecture, but hearing that Mrs. N had arrived, he interrupted the meeting and came down to his room to talk with her. They talked briefly, and Prabhupada excused himself and returned to the roof to lecture. Around midnight, he returned to his room again. Mrs. N was still waiting. She burst into tears and bowed at Prabhupada's feet. "I'm sorry for everything I have done," she sobbed. "Please forgive me." She promised to do whatever Prabhupada wanted. Prabhupada looked at her compassionately and understood her heart. "You are just like my daughter," he said. "Don't worry, I will take care of you. I will see to all of your needs for the rest of your life." And Prabhupada said he still accepted the very terms she had proposed, that he pay the remaining balance of 12 lakh plus 50,000 rupees compensation for the delay. Prabhupada and Mrs. N had set November 1 as the tentative deadline for the final signing of the conveyance. Shortly after their meeting, Prabhupada moved from Bogilal Patel's to the home of Mr. Sethi, where, working intensely, he tackled the remaining problems, such as getting C Company to withdraw their claim. Next, he moved to the home of Mr. C.M. Kathau, just two blocks from Hare Krishna land, where he lived in a summer cottage, a simple structure with a bamboo frame and chatai walls. Usually, conveyance had to be signed in the presence of the city registrar at his office downtown. But Mr. Asnani had arranged for the registrar to come to Prabhupada's place. At 6:30 in the evening, Srila Prabhupada was seated at his low desk between two windows, his back against the wall. Mrs. N and her lawyers, the registrar, Mr. Asnani, Mr. and Mrs. Sethi, and about 8 devotees were present, and the full room grew warm and stuffy. Mrs. N sat at Prabhupada's right as the registrar prepared the papers for signing. Srila Prabhupada sat gravely. The room was silent except for the sound of papers rustling and a pen scratching. Preparing and signing the conveyance papers took more than 20 minutes. Prabhupada paid Mrs. N, who then signed the conveyance. The land was legally ISKCON's. Giriraja. The room was hushed during the signing, and everyone felt as if a momentous event was taking place, just as if two great world powers were signing a treaty. After Mrs. N signed the document, Everyone silently watched the papers being passed. She started to cry. Tamala Krishna Goswami quietly asked her why she was crying. And Mrs. N replied that just that day, Mr. Matar had come and told her he had found a buyer for the land for many more lakhs than we were paying. Actually, as we were watching Mrs. N, we were thinking that she must be remembering all the events that had taken place, the wrongs that she had done, the death of her husband. It was very intense, like a combination of months of struggling. So for Prabhupada, the devotees and Prabhupada's well-wishers, their dreams and desires and efforts over the past many years were being fulfilled. Srila Prabhupada asked that the devotees inform the newspapers, and he invited everyone into the hall outside his room for a feast. Mats were rolled out in two lines, and devotees brought leaf plates and placed them in front of everyone. The devotees began serving the various dishes the to the 2 rows of seated guests. Prabhupada was standing. Now let us start, he said, as he supervised the serving. The devotees had prepared several courses: rice, dal, many varieties of pakoras such as potato, cauliflower, and eggplant, potato sabji, wet cauliflower sabji, papad, burfi, laddus, cham, a milk sweet, vermicelli kheer, halwa, and a lime tea. It was a festive and happy occasion. Mrs. Warrior, a tenant on Hare Krishna land. The devotees were all saying Jai after the signing, and all of them were very happy. Then Prabhupada gave a lecture about the Bombay project. He gave an idea to all the people of how it would be all marble. There wouldn't be a single thing that wasn't built from marble. Some were asking how it would be possible for everything to be marble. And Prabhupada explained that it was possible and could be done. He was visualizing the project, and everyone was thrilled to hear the way he was describing it. It would be like one of the 7 wonders of the world. People would be attracted from all over to come and see it. It would be a landmark in Bombay. Prabhupada explained the whole project as if he saw it in his mind's eye. And he said that after it was constructed, it will be more than what we could visualize. It would be fantastic. After the late feast, when everyone had departed, Prabhupada returned to his room. Leaning back at his desk, he explained, it was a good fight. Later, Prabhupada would cite the story of the fight for the Bombay land as evidence that a person in Krishna consciousness has no problems. Now we have spent in Bombay 18 to 20 lakhs of rupees, he said months later while in tour to Europe. The property is actually worth 50 lakhs. People are surprised and some of them are envious. But if you come, you will find that it is a very, very fine place. It's just like a paradise garden, 20,000 square yards, and we have got 6 buildings. So actually, when we come to Krishna consciousness, there are no problems. Surely, the land was full of potential. But how could he say there had been no problems? No problems meant that Srila Prabhupada saw how Krishna personally arranged things for his devotees. When he had needed money, it had come in an amount that ordinarily would have been impossible to collect. And the formidable opposition Krishna had removed. Prabhupada had no organized means of income and little political influence to fight persons like Mr. and Mrs. N. But because he was surrendered to Krishna, there was no problem. All the problems of the world were created by the non-devotees who defied the injunctions of the Supreme. Anyone who is in Bhakti Yoga, Prabhupada said, he can understand that all problems are solved. We can practically see. And yet, he had to tolerate the problems created by the non-devotees. For almost 2 years, he had struggled to secure the land for Krishna's service, whether in Bombay or elsewhere. He had had to worry over how to help his inexperienced disciples, who were ill-equipped to handle the ploys of the opposing party. It had been an ordeal, a test of patience, a challenge of courage. But because he had not been bewildered by Maya, illusion, there had been no problem. Prabhupada showed by his example that if one strictly follows Bhakti Yoga, one is not touched by the modes of nature, by Maya. The same transcendental science he constantly taught in his lectures and informal discussions, he also personally demonstrated. He was faithful in Krishna consciousness, and all his problems had been adjusted. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that if one surrenders to him, one easily overcomes all problems. The devotee understands that the problems of Maya can be overcome by surrendering to Krishna, by surrendering to the orders of Krishna's representatives, their spiritual master. Now that the land was ISKCON's, Prabhupada could proceed to enact his vision in attempting to construct buildings and propagate Krishna consciousness. He would meet more Maya-created problems, no doubt, but the greatest struggle had been won. The gorgeous temple of Sri Radha Vihari would manifest. In the future, devotees and guests would come to India's gateway and stay in a first-class hotel at Hare Krishna land and conveniently imbibe the spiritual atmosphere of the temple. And the devotees, as long as they did not forget Prabhupada's example and instruction, could successfully utilize the facility in the spirit of service to Krishna. The price Prabhupada had paid in tolerance and dependence on Krishna would never go in vain. What Srila Prabhupada produced by his tolerance was not only the facilities and the ongoing mission at Hare Krishna land, but a monumental living example of the behavior of a sadhu. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Kapiladeva describes the sadhu. Titikshvaha karunikaha surhada sarvadehinam ajata shatravaha shanta sadhavaha sadhu bhushanaha. The symptoms of a sadhu are that he is tolerant, merciful, and friendly to all living entities. He has no enemies. He is peaceful. He abides by the scriptures, and all his characteristics are sublime. Because the sadhu is tolerant, titikshavaha, he is undisturbed by the difficulties imposed by material nature. In Prabhupada's attempts to secure the Juhu property, he had met with enemies and difficulties, and he had been tolerant. Prabhupada had sometimes said, you have to tolerate. And a sadhu is not only tolerant, but merciful, karunikaha. When ISKCON's provisional temple had been attacked by the police, Prabhupada could have considered it a signal to leave the place and give up trying to help such ingrates by bringing them Krishna consciousness. Why go to such botheration? What's the use of trying? He had already nearly 100 temples outside India. If the people of Bombay didn't like Krishna consciousness, then why not go away and leave them to their fate? But no. As a genuine sadhu, Prabhupada was merciful because he had come to deliver the compassionate message of Krishna consciousness. He had to tolerantly give that message to everyone. People were misguided and were living like animals, only for sense gratification. And by the laws of karma, they would suffer in their next life. Seeing this unhappy predicament, Prabhupada had felt moved to help these fallen souls even if they were unappreciative. Srimad Bhagavatam also describes a sadhu as Suradaha, Sarvadehinam. The only desire in his heart is the welfare of all others. Being unbounded by nationalism, he thinks of himself not as an Indian or American or even as human being, but as eternal spiritual soul meant to benefit all living entities. A sadhu, Srimad Bhagavatam describes, is Ajata Shatru because he never creates enemies. Although envious persons may declare themselves as a sadhu's enemy, a sadhu behaves as the best friend of everyone, trying to bring everyone to Krishna. Because Prabhupada was trying to spread Krishna consciousness, envious persons would continue to oppose him. But as he sublimely showed in Bombay, what can be done? We have to tolerate. Thus, even before any foundations were laid for buildings, Prabhupada had already fully demonstrated all the ornaments of the sadhu, remaining peaceful, shanta, and depending on Krishna, he had become victorious. And for whoever serves such a great personality, Srimad Bhagavatam states, the door to liberation is open. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Mataji. Thank you all for session. So we'll resume again the coming week, next Sunday. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyeva cha paritanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha.